Welcome to Conversations With. My name is Shaley Hoogendoorn and I live with bipolar 2 disorder. Sharing with others is healing, both individually and collectively. Sharing our stories will educate others, bring more understanding, shed more light, and smash more stigma. Our voices need to be heard. Our stories aren't over yet. This is bipolar. Hi everyone, and welcome back to This is Bipolar Conversations With. I'm Shaley Hoogendoorn. I am a mama, a wife, a teacher, an event planner, and a fierce mental health advocate. And I am so excited to be here today because we have Maria Fernandez back. She was my very first interview for Conversations With, and we just had a really deep connection. And something a little different that I'm excited to tell you is, I don't know if you've listened to other episodes, but Julie is going to be writing another children's book. And so she cannot co-host and do that at the same time because it takes up so much capacity. And so just before she told me, it was so cool. I had gotten a text from Maria saying, you know what, I want to get back into more advocacy. How can I help? What can I do? Can I be a part of this? And I was like, 100% yes, whatever you can do. And it was just such, I don't know if I told you, Maria, but it was just such a comfort to me in a time of change, even beautiful change. Kind of, we know it kind of sets off things normally, and then especially when you have bipolar disorder. And so it was just so comforting, and I'm so excited for our community to get to know you better. And I'm so excited for them to hear from you. So you might get emails from Maria, or some people, times when we are answering messages, it might be me or it might be Maria, and we'll let you know who you're speaking to. And so, yeah, I am so grateful. Just so you know, we have 2 episodes with Maria that we did a year ago. And go listen to those to hear her full story, because we won't be able to talk about all of those things today, but we're going to check in and talk about some other really important things. So welcome to my team of us. Could you tell us a little bit, for those that don't know you, just a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am currently 28. I am a Zumba dancer, former Zumba instructor. I am currently in medical assisting school. I am the oldest of 7, and I'm passionate about mental health advocacy. And I really love nature, and really happy to be here.
I'm so happy too. Yeah. Maria, before we get right into everything, I wanted to ask you, what is your, no, I'm going to cut that part out. I skipped ahead. I just wanted to get started, and I wanted to ask you, just out of my own curiosity, what was it like to share your story on the podcast? I would just love other people to know what the experience is like.
It was, first of all, such an honor to be able to do that. You created such a safe space for me to share something so personal and vulnerable. It was scary, and very something I hadn't, done ever in my life. From, usually you share like snippets, there's this part and this part, but something you do start to finish is pretty intense. But it's something I was really proud of myself for doing, and something that I get to share with family and friends in, a single space on the podcast in the future. And I'm really grateful that I was able to do that through This is Bipolar.
Yeah, I'm so pumped. The reason I wanted to ask that, not just to feel really amazing, thank you so much for saying those things. That's my greatest hope, is that people will feel, safe enough just to share. And so a lot of the reason I ask too is because, once in a while, a couple times a year, we take submissions, and I just wanted to encourage people, if they're ready, just to apply, because we just love telling stories, and we just know that it freed us in a way, despite how hard it is. And so we want that same freedom and understanding for all of our listeners. We can't take on everybody, but we try our best. And even just applying, we just find that such a brave act. So thank you for sharing that. Well, I wanted to get into, and even I don't know all of this because it was summer and we're kind of talking here and there before we got back right into podcasting. And so I'm just curious, since a year ago, have you had any diagnosis changes? Where are you at? What is your full diagnosis? I'd love to hear.
Sure. So the main, well, I've had a couple diagnoses that have been added to my bipolar 2. My total, my bucket that I have now filled is bipolar 2, OCD, PTSD, anorexia, and binge eating disorder. The two kind of how I call them the main ones that show up most predominantly in my life is going to be bipolar 2 and OCD. The OCD I actually discovered on my own and brought forth to my psychiatrist saying, I notice these symptoms. Do you think that this is what I have? Because this is what I think I have. And sure enough, I should have gotten a degree myself because that was what I had.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a frustrating situation that, I came across that by myself, but also very, after that frustration wore off, it added a lot of clarity into my life because I was able to figure out how to navigate things with that new diagnoses, especially that being the other predominant diagnosis. And then the other diagnoses are kind of more consequential diagnoses to other factors of my life is kind of how I word it.
Yeah.
And those also added clarity. And a lot of those have been managed with coping skills and are not as painful to manage as the other ones. So those are the additional ones.
Yeah. I love that you brought that up because I find that, it's so complicated to diagnose, and it's so overlapping. And I'm curious about, I always think, and I'm working on this intrusive thought, but I always think, what if like 15 years ago, I was diagnosed, or when, I don't know if you struggled with this, but in the beginning, when I was trying to accept it, I was like, yeah, but what about this? Or what about this? Because so many overlap. Right. And so it's hard to figure out. So I love that you were an advocate for yourself, and just that you were able to look at your symptoms. I'm blown away by your self-awareness. And I just want to encourage other people out there that you know your symptoms best, and or the people around you see the symptoms that, sometimes when we're in different episodes. So it's very, very good to be able to bring that forward. I know for the longest time, I wanted the doctor to know, but I don't think I was giving enough information, right? Because I didn't want to, you always hear about people being the Google doctors. I didn't want to offend the doctor. I was like, by not questioning on them. So I love that. And I encourage our listeners too, if you're wondering, just ask, tell all the symptoms, every little clue helps. So yeah. And that was interesting how you worded that, because in my experience, when I had my deep depressions, or the great sadness, I call it, before I was treated or had my diagnosis. I had disordered eating, and I had gotten a loose diagnosis of that, but it was really hard because it was only when I was depressed.
Mhm.
And it was severe when I was depressed, but then I would switch, because I'm very cyclical, to hypomania. Didn't care, didn't have a hyperfixation on food, didn't, or whatever. So I was like, well, how can I have, like, can you have an eating disorder 6 months out of the year, right? And no one had ever told me before, but when I went to therapy, and someone that specialized more in bipolar disorder, they said, oh yeah, a lot of those end up being like coping mechanisms, or how did you word it? You had prevalent ones, which is the bipolar 2 and OCD.
Sure.
And then the other ones you say aren't as predominant, or you think that they just go alongside it.
Sure, right. That can be the case, but you can also have at the same time the full blown, so at the same time as you have those other diagnoses too. That is
Yeah.
definitely a possibility
Yeah.
for some people too. Like for me, for instance, I will go, usually how it works for me is I will go 1 year with struggling with anorexia, and then 1 to 2 years going with binge eating disorder. And it'll kind of ping pong that way. And that's just how the cycle rolls. And the cycle makes a lot of sense with how restriction works. But it doesn't mean that every day you're restricting. Sometimes you're only restricting for a couple days, and then you don't restrict for a month, and then but your body just processes things differently. So it's just different for everything. And like you said, everything overlaps and intertwines. But overall, it was just the fact that my predominant diagnoses were those two, and then ones that just weren't as predominant in meaning that they weren't causing me as much distress,
Right.
or the PTSD, anorexia, and the binge eating. So.
Right. Did you notice patterns, or was it just random? Like, did you notice if you were more in a depressive episode, or if you were more hypomanic? Do they show up? Like, is there a pattern, or is it random for you?
Yes, absolutely. So are we talking medicated or unmedicated?
How about you tell me both? Because I'm sure we have listeners that are in both situations. I'd love to hear that and the difference.
Okay, so unmedicated, I probably mood cycle on the hour.
Wow.
And have panic attacks once a day, and OCD every day. I have, there's a type of OCD where you have really bad thoughts, that's really rapid and quick. So that would be OCD. And then with eating, pretty much it's all at once.
Yeah.
That's pretty much off meds. And then on meds, I mood cycle twice a day, morning and evening, but it's tapered down. So to the average person, you wouldn't notice it. It's very subtle. OCD looks like perfectionistic tendencies.
Yeah.
And it also can kind of look like that way towards other people too. Like I get frustrated if other people don't do things in a perfectionistic way.
Yeah.
It bothers me, which is a little harsh to admit and to think that's the case. And I have a problem with schedules. Like everything has to be done on a certain schedule.
Yeah.
That also comes out with anorexia. That's kind of an OCD thing also. And then anorexia and OCD is usually a ping pong thing.
Okay.
That's usually how it works.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating to me. For those, including myself, that don't have an OCD diagnosis, I'm always wanting to ask people to explain their lived experience, or talk us through, if you feel comfortable, what that might feel like, or what a thought might look like, or a compulsion, because I feel like as a society, because of what we see on TV, or because what's become normalized, but not true in terms of this, ordering the Smarties or just having a clean house, right? I'd love, our listeners to learn a little bit more about that, but also to feel less alone, because I'm just finding, like right now, I'm so struggling, especially online, how we're using the word obsessed, right? Just like, we really like something, like I'm obsessed with a face cream. No, it's a severe mental illness. You are not obsessed. You like it very much, right? But we're just using this language, and I just feel passionate about unpacking that and talking about what it really is. So all that to say, could you explain, like, more detailed what that's actually like what it looks like, and what you feel like, how that works with getting the thought and then wanting to do the compulsion, and how you feel if you don't do it, and that kind of thing?
Absolutely. And I can apply that to OCD. I actually forgot to mention 2 symptoms of OCD, and I can apply that to that. 2 symptoms of OCD that I do have are really bad thoughts also, and then checking, which can apply to that. So checking can look like you, for instance, you lock your car door and you put your keys. Okay, how do I put this? Okay, so yeah, so you get out of your car, you put your keys in your purse, and you start walking to school, but you think you left your keys in your car, and you locked your car, with your keys in the car.
Yeah.
And so, but you put your keys in your purse, but you think you have to go check.
Yeah.
So even though you're halfway to campus, you have to walk back to check. And so that is doing exactly what you're saying, is you have this kind of this obsession that starts to build this where you need to start checking and checking and checking and checking. So you check once, and then you look in the car and it's not there, and you're like, okay. And then you walk back and you're like, well, I only checked the front seat, so maybe I should check the back seat. So then you go back and you check the back seat and it's not there. And they're like, all right, fine. And then your anxiety is relieved a little bit, and then you walk back, and then you walk to your classroom, but then you're like, well, maybe I need to check the trunk. And then so you go back, and every single time you continuously check, you feed into the obsession. And I know we're not supposed to use the word obsession, but that's the term for the actual action that you're doing. That's the appropriate term for it. That's the medical term for it. So when that's what you're not supposed to do, you're not supposed to check. So that's how it looks in that situation. And that's what some of the things that I struggle with, and something that I'm working through.
Yeah. Yeah. And then what does it feel like? Because that's how it disrupts regular life, right? A lot of us would be like, oh, I have that thought too. No, it's like to a very extreme level. And you'll do things like you said, leave an entire class, go very, very far, despite knowing. What does it feel like in your body during the times where you're wondering? Because I know that I would just love people to understand how intense that is, and why the wanting to do the compulsion is so overwhelming. Because I find a lot, you hear a lot of people be like, well, just don't, just don't. Tell us how that feels. I'm so curious.
I describe it as if you imagine you're like at your grandma's house and she has a bunch of fine china, and you accidentally knock off a piece of like her finest china, and it falls, and you jump for it to catch it. That feeling where your stomach just goes
yeah.
Imagine that, but constantly.
Oh wow. Yeah.
So your stomach can't stop feeling like you're about to like fall, or to have that pit in your stomach, or to have you're in trouble, or you're doing something wrong. It's just, there's something bad that's about to happen. The shoe's about to drop, the sky's about to fall. And if you don't fix this, something's about to light on fire.
Yeah. And it's all do you feel like then it would be all my fault because I didn't go and do the thing.
Yes, and it's different for everybody. Like, depending on the level of, for instance, OCD, sometimes for certain people, somebody's going to die.
Yeah, that's what you think. Wow.
So it can be
Yeah.
extremely excruciatingly painful.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that with us, because I think that sometimes, mental illness, we all think, it's all in your mind, but it takes over completely and physically. And yeah, just that was really helpful. Thank you. Yeah. And so I'm curious, that sounds like something really, really hard to find out. And I'm just wondering how you felt like after. I'm so curious because I think the word they use is comorbidities, right? Like where you have more than one diagnosis. Yeah. How does that make you feel? And what do you think is the stigma around that?
So I felt at first like the weight of the world was on my shoulders and like I couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
I have never in my life met anyone with more than one diagnosis.
Yeah.
At excuse me, when I found out, I was 27 years old, and last year, and I had never met anyone else with more than one diagnosis. So I felt paralyzed. The stigma around it, it doesn't exist in my mind because I had never met anybody.
Right.
So I could only imagine what the stigma would be.
Right.
Because it, to me, had not existed at that point.
Yeah. So that must have made you feel really alone.
Yes, it did. And I had a panic attack and I fell into a depression for about a week before I was able to kind of find the wherewithal to know, hey, this is just a roadmap to understanding myself.
Wow, that's powerful. Yeah. And it's interesting from what I hear from people that I've talked to or online or interviewed is that almost they struggle to talk about another one because there's so much stigma on having mental illness. And then there's this one misunderstanding, like you said, that this even exists. And people are less likely to talk about it because then they think like they're, even quote unquote, worse off, or in our brains, we like to make hierarchies of things. And we start to think, just that's worse. Or if we're someone like me that internalizes or internalized for so long that there's something wrong with me and not this is an illness, that must be really hard. So thank you for sharing that. I know there are so many people that have come forward, even if it's just in private messages. And so I'm sure you're starting to know, but I just want to remind you that you are not alone. You're not alone in this. Yeah. Yeah. So that is a very, very hard thing. I'm also curious if you could tell our listeners maybe some other messy moments that you've had this year so people feel less alone, and then maybe some beautiful things that have happened to you this year. I'd love to just catch up.
Sure. Messy moments. So in the middle of last year's podcast that we were recording,
yeah,
I was in the middle of waiting to hear news about the disability I had applied for based on recommendations from my psychiatrist.
Yeah.
I had a lot of mixed feelings about that, but I was basically doing that because my psychiatrist recommended it.
Yeah.
I ended up getting, right shortly after the podcast, getting a rejection letter
Oh.
and then a call from my case manager saying that, and her words were, and I quote, "You are disabled, but not disabled enough."
Oh.
And that made me feel incredibly stuck, because my whole life, up until last year, no one's really known really what to do with me, because I've had so many diagnoses and we've only recently just figured out what they were.
Yeah.
So I've just been very confusing to so many different providers.
Right.
And I've just been kind of experimented, with different medications. And, when I was a kid, I was thrown into so many different hospitals, and it was just so traumatic for me. And so to hear those words of disabled but not disabled enough just made me feel like, well, you're just going to be waiting around again for year after year after year after year, being in hospitals and meds. And so it just made me feel like I'm going nowhere again. And I'm, 27, and I just felt like, great, what is that supposed to mean for me? So I got really, really, really depressed and started kind of letting go of myself and self-sabotaging and doing all the things that, you don't want to do. And then I got angry researching. I don't know if any of you
Yes.
get into that.
Yes. It's such a motivation.
Yes. I'm like, I'm just going to angry research the heck out of things. I'm going to take control. Nobody is going to tell me if I'm disabled or not. It's
right.
like, so I started doing that, and I just started trying to put together things. I started taking personality quizzes. I started looking back at my job histories and trying to connect dots. And I realized that when I was in Colorado, and this was in my previous podcast, but I was living independently by myself, doing just fine. And the only reason I came home was because of altitude. That's it. It was nothing that I did. It was not because I was sick. It was just because of altitude.
Yeah.
And so I realized that my family and I had associated with, and my doctors and everybody had associated independence with trauma. And so anytime I went to reach for things or presented any goals or hopes or dreams, they would associate it with trauma, or they would look for some type of flaw in it, like possible hypomania.
Right.
They would shoot it down, or they would kind of show resistance to it, and then I would get scared, and then I would back off. And so in realizing this, I came to this, excited conclusion that, none of that means anything, because I did just fine in Colorado through hypomania, through depression, through my eating disorders. I still had OCD up there. I've had that my whole life.
Yeah.
I had all of those up there, and I did just fine. And, through everything I've been through all of my ups and downs that I've had, I did fine. So I went to my mom and I sat her down, and I was a little nervous, and I just said, Mom, and I told her all of this. And then I told her, I need you to believe me. I need you to believe me. I need you to support me. It doesn't mean that I'm not scared, because I am scared. I've been in this bubble for so long. I've been in a space where people told me, you're disabled, but you're not disabled enough. But I know in my soul that I can do Colorado again, that I can do something more again. And I need to believe in me. And she said, okay, but you got to be responsible. You got to take the proper steps and the proper precautions.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And I said, I'm not the same person I've grown up. Like in Colorado was like 4 years ago. I'm older, I'm more mature. I'm in therapy every week. I wasn't in therapy back then. I'm just like, I have a psych every month. It's different. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I got support, we're good. So long story short, I'm now in medical assistant school.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be in there in here till December 22nd. I moved out. I'm living with my best friend, and I'm doing stuff that's giving me confidence, that's making me feel independent. And I'm just really, really proud of myself for being able to take that step, for initiating with my parents, and for overcoming what I've overcome.
Wow, that's so powerful. I'm proud of you too. For those of you that don't know about the altitude thing, and I learned this from you, and I think about it all the time, Maria's meds stopped working, and the altitude there triggered her bipolar disorder and different episodes. So that's pretty wild. So if you're someone in Colorado and just seems like your medicine isn't working, maybe, look into that kind of thing. And maybe if you're considering moving somewhere, because I had no idea. But yeah, it sounds like your providers loved you and wanted the best for you, but their fears seemed like they might have held you back. And so how powerful is that you were able to just try, right? And I think what you said is the most important things. You're not, this is something that you live with, and it is incurable, and you're going to live with it, but you have all these systems and supports in place. And I think that sometimes, when we have periods in bipolar where we're not in one or the other, sometimes we can, convince ourselves that we don't need the things. But I think that that's one of the times to completely, try and get things in order so that you aren't desperate during crisis. So bravo, friend. That's wonderful. And I am cheering you on. And I just love that. I love that so much. Because we're talking about, the past in Colorado and different situations, we're recording this in September, and I'm pretty sure we're going to release it in September. Stay tuned. It is Suicide Prevention Awareness Week and month. And so before we get started talking to Maria as a survivor, I just wanted to remind all our listeners that this could be activating or triggering, and just take breaks. Or if you can't listen, or if you need to do things to take care of yourself, just feeling any, sensations in your body or worried, we would hate to trigger anything. So I just wanted to give a little heads up that we're going to be talking about that. So that being said, I know, Maria, you shared in detail the time when your attempt and your time in the hospital. I'm wondering if you could just give us I don't know, like an overview, because I'd really like to talk to you about things like what that felt like from a lived experience, because we're seeing all these amazing lists. And I mean, I've shared them too, and, ideas and hotlines, but I feel like there's not as much lived experience stories out there. And it's more like professionals telling us. So if you could just tell us a little bit about that time, and then maybe just what you think would help our listeners know about suicidal ideation plans, what that experience was like for you, I would be so grateful.
Sure. So a little bit about that time for me. So I kind of mentioned it earlier, but I was going through, I was off my medication. So like I mentioned, I was pretty much mood cycling, a lot.
Yeah.
I had some trauma that was triggered, and I had experienced a panic attack that was the worst panic attack I had ever had in my life, and I overdosed. And I really and I woke up to my family that was there. I had a really great support team. It was really, really tough. I remember feeling very sad, and I remember feeling a pit in the bottom of my stomach, feeling a lot of regret, and I had to relearn how to walk a little bit, and it was hard to eat. And but I was very grateful for my second chance at life. And I remember thinking that if it was hard to live the first one, that I was sure grateful, or I sure have other reasons to live the second one, which is my family. I think that's in regards to suicide ideation, and you said some of the signs to look for. Is that what you said?
Yeah, just your experience, because we see the classic signs, but I'm curious about almost diving into your thoughts and where you were like, and maybe we all have our different baselines and personalities, like what signs could have people maybe seen, or what was, how were you acting during that time? Like, did you have a plan? Was it spontaneous? Does that help?
Sure. So it's very different for everybody.
Yes.
I had trauma, and a nurse who had actually said that if you don't fix yourself, you'll end up on the street doing drugs, harming
Oh,
nobody. And I had that quote in my head at the time that I had the panic attack. And that thought was just recycling itself in my head, and I couldn't get it out. And so at first, I started overdosing, not trying to attempt. It was just trying to put myself into a coma to try to fall asleep, because I just wanted peace. And I remember that being my specific intention. I just wanted to fall asleep, kind of like taking melatonin. We didn't have melatonin, and so I just said, okay, well, I'll just try to fall asleep.
yeah.
So, but then at a certain point, I realized, well, this probably could end up doing more damage than that. And I just didn't care. I just realized that, maybe, that I had just hurt my family a lot, and that maybe, my family wouldn't miss me. And so I didn't have, I guess, this full-blown plan. It just kind of folded as the panic attack went on. And so it's kind of, I don't know if that's standard per se, or what's written in books. I don't know if other people have experienced that. I'd be interested to know, or have other conversations with other people.
Yeah.
But that's just how it went for me.
Yeah. I think that a reoccurring thing that we hear is, less I want to die, but more like, this pain is so excruciating, I cannot or don't want to live through that. And thank you for sharing. I can really relate, because I also, from what we're taught and how people talk about suicide and suicide ideation, I was always like, nope, never thought, never. And the more the past few years, just unpacking, when I was in the deep waters of sadness, and I had reoccurring intrusive thought, because I knew most summers I would switch, right? I didn't know it was hypomania at the time. I thought it was my regular self. I thought I'd switch back to my regular self. I remember thinking, I just want to sleep until that time.
Right.
And I read this thing about, because I've been looking into it a little bit more, about it's called passive suicidal ideation. And the statistics for people that have those types of thoughts are actually really, really high and not abnormal, right? We look to one way of being or thinking about it. And I've just found it like scary and hard, but also powerful to just even say that out loud, because I think there's just such a fear that if you even admit to having thoughts or ideation or wanting to disappear or those kinds of things, that people are you're going to freak people out, right? Or you're going to get locked up involuntarily. And I'm not saying that, like, psych wards and different facilities have saved people's lives. So please, please, please don't hear stigma in my voice. Don't hear that there is anything wrong with you. And if that's going to keep you alive, then please, please go to emergency. But I think that's one of the biggest things that we can do. People are like, oh, what can I do to be more aware? And I think listening, but also creating a space that someone can actually tell you, right? It's not like everybody wants to keep it a secret. It's just, it doesn't feel safe. And it feels like it becomes about the other person, right? Because I shared this post, and one of them was what not to say. I shared it by this awesome called the Spread Love Project. Her account is phenomenal. And I reshared it. And one of them was, please stay, I will miss you. And I was thinking about that for a minute, and we got a comment that said, can you explain that more? I feel like that would be a good thing to say. And what it talked about is that people are less likely to open up or get past that initial telling and explain their full experience, because inadvertently the one that wants to help is making it about them. Right? And so I think that it's really important, and I'm so grateful that you're sharing your experience. And I think the other thing that I would say is listen to lived experience. We know, of course, there are textbooks for a reason, and I mean, I'm grateful for them because I actually have a diagnosis and path forward. But I think like too often we look to experts, and it's taken me a long time to believe it. But I remember when someone said, yes, you don't have a medical degree, but you're an expert in your experience with bipolar disorder because it is your experience. And that really empowered me to share more and say yes to more panels and such, because I was always like, oh, there's going to be a therapist there, or oh, like I invalidate my experience. So all that rambly to say, for people that are wondering how they can create space for other people, is not making it about yourself. And there are tons of good posts out there and or research and lived experiences, people telling you, both what not to say coming from people with lived experience and what things were helpful.
Right.
And so I just really wanted to, just put that out there, because I find it so hard when someone just asks, what should I do, about being aware or prevention? And I'm curious so then there probably wasn't huge signs to look for, because yours wasn't a plan and it happened more in the moment. So there wasn't. So I think that makes it so much more important to be able to talk about it too and normalize it, because you're right. With people, there are some people that, they make a plan and then it behaviors will show up, but there are some people that in the moment just want things to stop. Or I've heard that before too. They want to numb, but we're unaware of how much medicine, the fine line. And I found that really powerful that you said, I just wanted to sleep, sleep or be in a coma because you were so afraid. And the nurse, like, I'm so angry for you. Like, honestly, I think that that's why it's so important to have like trauma informed care. And is that a big part of what you're learning about? Is there a lot of information, or do they are speaking a lot about mental health? Are you learning about that as well?
I did a lot of trauma therapy for probably 5 years with a therapist,
Wow.
straight. And she did internal family systems and EMDR.
Yes. Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you explain what that is for people that don't know?
Sure. Internal family systems is where they believe, I'm really bad at explaining these things.
No, no, no.
So in elementary terms, they just believe that basically there's like a branch of so you basically put names to your feelings
Ah,
or your emotions or your diagnoses. So for instance, um, like my version of like sick girl, or the girl that I resonated with as like it's hard to explain, but like she was Gollum from like Lord of
okay.
the Rings,
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
or like my anorexia was like this Batgirl. So, and so what happens is then you separate it outside from yourself. So it helps you understand that it's not who you are, it's not you, it's outside of yourself. And then you can have conversations with them. You can
Yeah.
talk to them, you can interact with them. It's kind of like what you do with, I think, Agnes anxiety or something.
Yes, you
Yeah.
remembered. Yes, I talked to Agnes. I listened to her and then asked her to quietly sit in the back seat.
Exactly, yes. And they do all kinds of work, like you do imaginary work where you close your eyes, and I might be describing it very poorly, so I apologize, but that's how I would describe it. And then EMDR, they do work with where working with the left brain and the right brain, and they help you retrieve memories from the past, and they work on processing those memories that are usually blocked off. And
Yeah.
so that helps you. You would think, like, why would you want to process memories that are closed off?
Yeah.
But the whole purpose of that is those memories that you think that are being closed off are actually hurting you, and they are affecting you in your current day-to-day lives.
Yeah.
And so they need to be processed.
Yes.
And people obviously have the option whether they want to or they don't. But for me, it helped me. Both of those therapies are very, very difficult. They're very something that requires a ton of vulnerability and should be done by an extremely well-trained therapist. Should be by somebody who knows what they're doing. And if you get it done well and right, then it can be extremely healing and beneficial to your treatment process. I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point. I know that some things, we tend to think it's linear and, oh, we're better, or we want to believe that if we've tucked it away that we've dealt with it. And what I'm learning more and more about mind-body connection and embodiment is that even if you don't think about it, your body remembers. And your brain made new neural pathways in order to, it would alter that the situation or trauma would alter it. And I'm talking about like things like big T trauma, but also, I call them small T trauma, where it may not seem like to you as big as something like, we used to just think that PTSD was for soldiers, but sometimes your body processes certain situations as traumatic, whereas the same situation might not be traumatic to someone else. And so I think you brought up a really good point that it would be horrible and terrible for a while, but it needs to be done, right? Like it needs to come up. And I don't mean like constantly talking about it, but able to deal that. I know that I did recently therapy where, and I joke on the internet and in reels and such about things I used to think were hippy dippy, or things I used to think were like, that's weird, how helpful they are. I had to speak to my anxiety, and not just like in my head, because you kind of, I was saying, oh yeah, I do that to my therapist. She's like, okay, well, let's do it now. And so I had to have like a chair, and the one was like the anxiety, and then me, and I had to talk to it. And then I had to try and think about what my anxiety was telling me. And it was really powerful. And it was the first time that I was like, I always villainize my anxiety, but recognizing that it showed up to keep me safe in certain situations, or it showed up thinking it would keep me safe. Because we know that, with mental illness, anxiety can come for no reason. So yeah, the way our bodies reacted at that time helped keep us what we thought was safe, and then sometimes it sticks around for people with sensitivities or whatever, right? Because some people, it'll come in, help you in an actual real life situation of stress and panic, or it just comes and then just you think it's helpful, so it sticks around. So that's really powerful. And acknowledging it, right? Like acknowledging it. I used to think that I was only on a healing journey or only doing better if I could eradicate the thoughts or the feelings or whatever, but acknowledging them, but then placing distance between, like you said, was so important. Because I think we internalize it as it's our personality, or our illness is not who we inherently are.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I have never had EMDR, but I'm really fascinated with
Not
it.
for everybody, but if it works for you, then it's great.
Yeah. That's awesome. Do you have, people are always asking and curious about, because we're all so different, do you have any daily practices or daily strategies, or even weekly, that really help you? I'd love to hear about that.
Yes. So the main thing for me, which is a little ridiculous, but if I can get to a Zumba class every day,
yeah,
that is honestly my thing for me. I'm a very physical and high sensory person.
Yeah.
And it also is something that utilizes my brain. And when it makes you think. It's like, you're thinking about the steps, you're thinking one thing at another, it occupies your mind. You have to focus, it's not like going for a run where you're just like, oh, look, the tree,
Yeah.
It's, which, running, can be nice too. But I'm just saying,
for
you
you
have to be very focused and paying attention. Plus there's music blasting. So Zumba is just a passion. So I'm just saying, if there's something that ignites your passion and that feeds your soul, that's self-care. That is something that just makes you come alive. And if you can find something that makes you come alive to the extent that just makes you feel happy to be alive, if you can do that every day, then that's a blessing. I can't do that all the time because one, it's exhausting.
Yeah.
and two, I have school right now, but that's something I can do. Another one is also prayer. There's also anything with like I said, sensory stuff, smells, lotions, perfumes.
Yeah.
There's this thing that's a little funny, but you get a sock.
Yeah.
Fill it with rice.
Yeah.
You put it in the microwave and you can put it over your neck.
Yeah.
That one's really good. Yeah. I also have a essential oil diffuser.
Yeah.
And so I use a lot of those. Those are probably my main ones.
Yeah, yeah. And I just want to be clear too that this is alongside your, your treatment, your medication and such.
You meant those. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't mean those. No, I meant exactly. I just wanted to, because I know that I always talk about that people sometimes tell me those are cures, and I love that it's a different that that you mentioned that it's self-care, and those are practices that help, right? Whereas some people take it to extreme and say that it cures, but there's actual research that what you're saying, that using your different senses actually physically, and I'm not a doctor, so look it up if I get it a little wrong, but actually does something to trigger your nervous system or vagus nerve, I think. I don't know, that was pretty fancy, maybe look it up. But it actually jolts or calms or just switches, like just gives you a little switch. And also I can completely relate. I don't do Zumba, but and because I used to be almost clinically obsessive with exercise, I think it of as feelings moving out of my body. And like you said, I think it's different than numbing. Like I think it's very good to give yourself a total break from feeling and thinking, and because we think so fast and so much. I find a real difference from numbing but then also using practices, right? I know I'm numbing if I'm scrolling for hours and hours. I know I'm numbing, which still gives me a break, but it isn't working through it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because when you're like, for me, it's yoga, I'll fall over. If I'm not listening, and because as I said, my rights and lefts, a little bit hard for me. So I have to, so you activate that part of your brain so that the other part of your brain isn't, you're not able to think those thoughts. And sometimes they still come during yoga, right? But I know that then I will fall over and then I need to so I love that you brought that up. And yes, self-care is not selfish, and find your thing. Like it sounds, I love that you have your thing, that Zumba and movement and dance and music, helps you. Yeah, that's amazing. Well, before we sign off, what I would love to hear is, what would you say to someone that's maybe listening or watching right now that is feeling the great sadness or feeling overwhelmed and wanting their really, really hard, messy, awful thoughts, and or have suicidal ideation, maybe someone that is considering a plan? What would be your words of encouragement to them right now?
Words of encouragement. I think you're not alone. It's okay to cry. Sometimes there's really nothing that you can say to someone
Yes.
in the face that's going through that. And all you can really do is sit next to them and put your hand over them and just give them a hug and bring them some hot tea and put a blanket over them and turn on their favorite show and just sit with them. So I think I wouldn't really say anything with them. I think I would just be their friend.
Wow. That is so powerful. That is just so powerful, and such a good reminder for me as well. And right now, yeah, just such a good reminder that we feel so much pressure to say the right thing, and that just showing up and the sitting in people's pain and just being there or feeling like you have a friend. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for being here and vulnerably sharing again. And I'm so excited for our community and our listeners that they get to experience the warmth and care that I feel knowing you. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaley.
This is Bipolar. Thanks again for tuning in. You can find video versions of This is Bipolar on our YouTube channel. We also have all our previous and soon-to-be future episodes of the podcast on Apple, Podbean, Spotify, and Google Play. We spend most of our time on Instagram at this.is.bipolar. There is a vibrant community there where we have conversations and post different ideas and different strategies, and we'd just love for you to join us there. It is so helpful if you enjoy our work or think it would be helpful to someone if you could like and share and save and follow us in all or any of those spaces. If you're a listener for the podcast, if you could leave a review, we would be forever grateful. Again, thank you for being here with us. Let's get the word out. Let's share lived experiences so that we can change the ideas that people have about bipolar and help those of us that live with it feel less alone. This is bipolar.